Good morning. You can see the bees here are bringing in the nectar. You can see it glistening in the bottom of the cells, which is fantastic. We're going to be doing a live Q&A today, and if you've got questions, put them in the comments and we'll get to answering those. Meanwhile, we are going to tap a little bit of honey. Although it's not capped and ready in this edge frame, if we come around the corner and look at the back of the hive, we can see there's some nice honey coming in, and all of that has come in the last couple of weeks. So it's pretty exciting to see that after a really long time without much honey here. We had that horrific fire season, and there's been a bit of a hangover from that, where a lot of tree species just didn't flower when we thought they would. But now it's almost springtime and the flowers are blooming, and we're seeing some great results with the honey coming in. If you have a look here, you can see that while some of these frames aren't ready, you can see that the cells here, that honey's not right up to the edge. And we also noticed that on the side windows, the honey wasn't ready. You couldn't see that wax capping over the top. But here in the center, I'm having a look down the sides and seeing they are putting the capping on. There's a few cells still missing, but we're getting impatient. We know there's a lot of nectar to come, so we're going to go ahead and just harvest one frame, leave the rest for the bees. So without further ado, we will do that. And Frey, who's been with us on our customer support team for many months now, she actually arrived at the office and it was the driest time with the least honey, so she's pretty excited to have a go at the harvesting. She's grown up as a beekeeper, and the flow hive technology is actually new to her. So here we go.
Cool.
If you can do this, I'll just explain what to do because you haven't done it before. So first of all, we want to take this cap out of the bottom here. So you've chosen your frame, it's looking nice and full, and twist that, that's it. And now with your tube, you can insert that in, and it goes the other way around. There's a little tongue on it, and that tongue is to block up that little gap there. And that's an important little gap that allows the last remaining drips to drain back into the hive later. So we need to put that little tongue in there, and that also serves the function of cleaning out the wax that they build up and block that little honey leak back point. So the idea there when we're doing all the inventing and design work was to make it so you didn't have to think about it. The tube would automatically unblock that point. There's a little cap at the top you need to pull out, and you'll notice there's two slots up there. There's a lower one and an upper one.
Oh, yeah.
And what we want to do is lift those cell parts. So we want to go on the underneath side. That's it, and just go in a little ways, that's enough. And sometimes I find the easiest way is one hand here to brace it. So put left hand there, and then use your right hand on the end of the key. Sometimes grab it like you mean it, like that, because it does need a bit of force sometimes. That's it, and just turn it to a 90. Don't be afraid, just turn it. And what you're doing is you're actually creating pathways through the honeycomb. That's it. Keep going till it'll kind of click into place. That's it. And leave it at that 90 position just for a sec. And what that does is start those pathways forming. So if you watch that, you can see what the honey's doing, and that's a representation of each cell line in the frame. So that's times by about 79, what you're seeing here. And there it is, the beautiful honey starting to flow out. And I really look forward to tasting this because I think it's the tuckaroo flowers, and there's a few tuckaroos you can see down here in the valley. It's that beautiful candy shop flavour, hopefully. So you can go in and turn the key again just by inserting it a bit further. If you want to go again now. Yeah. And that's it. Keep going. Great. So you could just harvest a little bit of honey by inserting the key part way, or you could go ahead and harvest a whole lot of honey by inserting the key all the way. Okay, can't wait to taste it. In fact, I'm going to taste it now. We better use a mint leaf. Fingers are probably taboo these days, and mint's a beautiful flavour to add to it. It is that beautiful flavour. I think you really need to try that. It's certainly a
That's very good.
a delight in the garden. So you can go ahead and put this all the way in now and turn it, and that will harvest the whole frame. That's it. And now all of the cell lines in that frame will be forming pathways for the honey to flow down into the trough at the bottom and out. So we'll expect that stream to pick up over time as all of that honey starts moving down. So any questions?
Yes, Cedar, there's one coming in actually, and it's not a dumb question, Christopher, because no question is dumb. Just wondering, does the honey need to be processed or pasteurised or anything before consuming?
Okay, that's a great question. The answer is no. The bees do a wonderful job at creating honey, which is an amazing product, and it's best kept with no processing. The reason why it's best kept with no processing is it's full of vitamins, minerals and phytonutrients and enzymes that actually have amazing medicinal properties. If you go and then pasteurize that and heat it like they often do with the supermarket honey, you'll find that you'll actually lose those beneficial products that honey has. So it's definitely good not to pasteurize it, and there's no filtering needed. If you have a look at this, there's rarely anything in the jar. If anything, a couple of little wax flakes that will float to the top. As you can see, that's perfectly ready for the table.
Beautiful. Vanessa's actually asking, Cedar, like you checked the back of the hive, do you need to actually check the full frame before you crack the whole frame?
Look, we didn't, but you certainly could, and it's in this situation where you're not quite sure because you're seeing empty frames on the edges, you're still seeing empty here. It could be a good idea to get in there and have a look. But over time you start to get a feel for what it looks like when the honey frames are getting full, and start to get a good idea of when they're filling. They tend to fill from the middle of the hive out, and when they're hungry they tend to eat from the middle of the hive out. So keeping that in mind, you can start to gauge when it's a good time to harvest the honey. But in the end, if you're seeing caps down the end here, it's a good indicator that it's going to be mostly capped all the way through. If you do happen to harvest when it's not quite ready, it's not the end of the world. It'll still be a beautiful product, it just won't keep on the shelf. So that's really the issue there. Now Frey, you're going to need another jar, and the trick is to swap the jar without spilling a drop. Now, no pressure, just being on camera and everything. Okay, there we go, not too bad at all. Okay, and look at that beautiful jar of honey.
It's very satisfying.
It is, isn't it? There you go. You can take that home, and you'll probably run out of honey at the moment.
Cedar, is there any particular species of bees that you recommend for the flow hives?
So all of the Apis mellifera is the ones to use. Now that's our European honeybee that we've taken around the world wherever we go, because they're such amazing little pollinators. So humans and Apis mellifera, or the European honeybee, have had a very long lasting relationship where they've become completely intertwined with our food chain. So it's but there's all of these breeds of those, and the Italians seem to be quite popular. So the Italians are the typical golden honeybees you see around. Then some bee keepers or some bee breeders like the Caucasians, which are a dark honeybee, others like the Carnolians and so on. So it really depends where you're getting your bees, and in the end they're probably going to be a bit of a mixture, because what you find is your queen will probably mate with a number of drones from the surrounding area and get all of that genetics, and that could be a bit of a mixture of different breeds as well. So you get dark bees and light bees in the one hive. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Just simply ask for a breed which is friendly. If you're starting out, you want nice, gentle genetics. It would just be more of a joy to have your family around.
Fantastic. Cedar, Terence is in New Jersey and it's at the end of the flow and has been feeding the bees, and they ate everything in one day. Do you think he should feed them more?
Yes, if you're feeding your bees to make stores for a winter that's coming, and it's going to be a long cold winter, then the best idea is to keep up with that feed and let them really store some honey for the winter. And if you can store it prior to the winter, it's definitely better than trying to feed them over winter, because it can be hard to get them to take the feed during the really colder times. So I'm not an expert in this. We don't need to feed in this area. There's flowers about all year round, and if we do have times without flowers, then there's still usually something at least for the bees to go and get pollen and nectar stores from. But if you are in an area where you do need to build those stores for winter, by all means go and feed them and keep up the feed. Get some stores going for that long cold time ahead.
Thanks, fantastic. A local beekeeper, Delene, is just wanting to know, Cedar, she has a flow and the bees swarmed recently, but then she's just noticed that they've swarmed again. Is there anything that she should be doing?
Okay, occasionally you do get a hive that does do that, and it's largely genetics that lead to a swarming tendency, and sometimes bee breeders will tend to breed for non-swarming genetics, because it can be a bit annoying if half your bees keep leaving before they've even filled the super box full of honey. It's much better if they stay around, complete the job before they think about swarming. It gives you more time to get in there and either reduce swarming tendencies or to take a split, which also would limit them from swarming. So what I would recommend doing is, first of all, your colony is going to be weak because a lot of bees have left, and it sounds like they got a bit carried away. It's none of these hives and none of the hives at my place are swarming yet, so it's very early, and it's a little bit unusual to be swarming already. But what you need to do now is make sure you look after your colony so that it can rebuild. Now, if you have the flow hive too, you can activate the hive beetle trap in the bottom, and that'd be a good idea because hive beetles will prey on a colony that has low bee numbers. So you want to make sure you're catching those and just give your hive the time to get another laying queen going and to build up again. Once they build up again, generally the beetles aren't a problem. If you've got lots of bees in the hive, they'll manage those. So that's a good thing to be doing, is just watch those hive beetles. And hopefully this time around the genetics will be different. Your hive will stay around and you will get a nice honey harvesting. We've got spring ahead of us here, so fingers crossed you'll get a nice box full of honey in the next few months.
Fantastic. Cedar, a few people noticing that we're harvesting and we're not having bees all diving into the honey. A couple of people are saying when they harvest, their bees all seem to dive into the honey. Is there anything you'd suggest that they do to stop that, or why aren't ours dive bombing the honey?
So it's an important thing to think about. If you're in a situation where your bees are so hungry that they're coming and dive bombing the honey, then it may not be the time to harvest, although depending on your strategy you might be harvesting the last remaining things and taking boxes off. So in that case, if you've got hungry bees around that are really going for the honey, you'll need to cover up your jar with a piece of netting or a bit of kitchen wrap to make sure the bees aren't feasting on the honey. you're not allowed to leave honey out for bees because you could be spreading pathogens from this hive to other hives. So it's important if the bees start going for the honey to manage that situation and cover it up. Generally, we find we can sit here behind the hive and it's not an issue. Occasionally we have 1 or 2 bees come, we fish them out, put them back at the entrance. However, some people do like to connect their tube to their jar or to their bucket, and by putting a piece of hose on here. If you're going to do that sort of thing, make sure the air can escape. Otherwise what will happen is the honey will be trying to get out of the frames and won't be able to get into the bucket because there'll be an airlock and you'll end up flooding your hive. So yeah, the simple answer is cover it up if you need to.
Fantastic. Cedar, how many mils or kilograms do you get out of a flow frame? And if you're running out of jars, can you stop it midstream?
You can't stop at midstream. So if you only want to harvest a small amount of honey, then you want to just insert a little way like this. So you generally get 6 or sometimes 7 of these jars out of a frame. And if you do want to harvest just a small amount, let's say if you divided this key, it inserts about to this far. If you divide it into 6, you'd just be going in that far for 1 jar. So if you only want a small amount, you'll just need to go in a little way and turn it like that, and then you'll get a small amount of honey. Once you've then gone and harvested the frame, you will need to finish the process. Otherwise, if you try and stop it by putting the key in the top slot and turning it, what you'll find is you'll get a lot of honey spilt inside the hive, which is, the bees will clean up, but it's not ideal. You're better off finishing the process, and when it slows down to a trickle, you can then put the cap in, and the last remaining bits you can let go back to the bees. Good question.
Nice.
Okay, beautiful.
Cedar, does it matter on climate as to when you harvest your honey? Teresa harvested, it was a really hot day in San Diego. That she did the whole frame, but she did have a little bit of leakage. Should she just do a little bit if it's a really hot day, or what would you recommend?
Yes, what I would recommend there is just do a few frames, and if you've got a lot of honey spilling, then get in contact. A little bit can be normal depending on the way the bees cap the frame, depending on whether you've got higher viscosity honey down low and more runny honey up top, and things like that can affect whether some honey spills in the hive. In the end, if you're just harvesting a few frames, the bees can deal with that. If you find you've got an issue where you're continually getting lots of spilt honey in the hive, get in contact. Sometimes we go through with the customer troubleshooting, and there's an issue where perhaps the hive's on the wrong tilt. You set it up right in the beginning, but the front has sunken and there's not enough slope on it, so that would be one thing to check. Or it could be an issue where the frame parts haven't been resetting properly. You can get this kind of thing happening where let's say you turn the key, and we do recommend turning the key on closure and leaving it for a little while, because all of those parts are trying to move back against that wax and propolis. If they don't quite make it and they end up sitting there like that, what happens down at the very bottom, just before the trough here, is they'll build up a bit of wax or propolis there to fill in that gap. And then if you imagine that then moving to that position there to create an open cell, there's only a very small pathway for the honey to fall. So things like that we can help troubleshoot to, if you're getting a lot of honey spilt in the hive, then there could be an issue. So please do get in contact with us. But otherwise, you often find a little bit spills, but the bees will just clean that up.
Fantastic. Cedar, once you've harvested the honey, do you have to let it all run out before you close it off, or what's the best way once you're finished? I guess you're probably about to do that.
So the best way is to let it slow right down. Now, if you've got time, you can just keep it going and you'll get another jar out of it at the end when it's slowing. If you haven't got time, then you can you could close it off and let the last bits go back to the bees.
Fantastic. Cedar, a couple of questions. I've seen you sometimes do when you extract the honey using 2 flow keys. Would you recommend that, or is that just for particular frames?
So that's more of a troubleshooting technique. Sometimes you find the bees, they've got a high propolis content, or they're really connecting the frame parts strongly together, and it gets quite hard to get the parts to actually move. Or perhaps you've left it there for years and haven't harvested, and they're just very strongly glued together. Then a troubleshooting technique is to put 2 keys in, and I'll show you how that works now, but it's not something that you should need to do normally, but it is something you can try if you like. I'll just grab another key here, and what it does is it just provides a bit more pressure across the flow frame top here. If you have a look in the end, there's a cross member, if you like, and that's really a spring-loaded piece designed so that if the frame is jammed with candy or something like that, then that will actually bend upwards. So putting 2 keys in will increase the pressure and give you a better shot at getting those parts moving. Waiting for a nice warm day will also make it easier to move those parts. But generally 1 key is just fine.
Fantastic. Brad, I think he must have watched you do the walkaway split, Cedar, and he's saying he did his first walkaway split last week and has had 7 queen cells between 2 frames, and just not sure whether he should wait to see how many hatch or should he delete a few. Or
amazing, that's a great result. Well done, and well done. It wasn't very long ago that we did that video with my sister with her hive, and so good on you for jumping in there and having a go and getting back in there to see what's going on. That's fantastic. If you've got lots of queen cells forming, generally I find the best thing to do is let the bees sort it out. However, if you wanted to, you could take some of those cells and put them into another split again. So beekeepers who are breeding will see that and they go, okay, we can take some of those queen cells and actually take more splits from the hive. So you could go and do that, or you could just let the bees sort it out. There is a few different opinions here, so if you've got opinion on that, jump in the comments. Also help coming in, so help people by putting in the answers if you already know the answer. But if you've got an opinion on that one, put it in the comments. There certainly is management techniques where people do suggest getting in there and cutting off the queen cells and just leaving 1. Now, I tend to leave it up to the bees more so, and especially when you're starting out, sometimes more intervention will get you into trouble than less. After all, the bees do know what they're doing.
great. Cedar, do the jars need to be sterilised before you put the honey into them?
They don't, because honey is full of antimicrobial properties. It's got even natural hydrogen peroxides, it's got enzymes. As long as the moisture content is below about 20%, then that honey will keep. That'll stop any yeasts and things getting hold and that fermentation process starting. So it's more about the moisture content of the honey. So you can use something called a refractometer if you want to test it, or you can simply just let it cool down. When it's warm, it tends to be more liquid. Let it cool down, and if it seems nice and thick like normal honey, then it's probably going to keep. If it's a bit runny in the jar, then it might ferment after some weeks or months.
Fantastic. I've got a new beginner beekeeper and they're just wondering, what do you think is the best way to start a colony? Is it with a nuke or with a swarm colony?
A nucleus is the easiest way to go because you've already got a functioning hive. You've got a queen, you've got pollen stores, honey stores, brood. It's actually a going little hive, and all you have to do is get in your bee suit, get your smoker out, transfer it into your brood box, look after it, and they'll grow. Now, that's probably by far the easiest way to go. If you want to catch a swarm, by all means, jump on the lists to get notified. You can find Facebook groups, you can find local contact numbers of pest people who might be able to notify you of swarms, and it's a fantastic thing to do. Catching a swarm's a lot of fun. I've done a lot of it. If it's nice and handy and easy to reach, then it's a quite easy process to get it into your box, and it's a fun way to start. So it depends how adventurous you are, but the nucleus is by far the easiest way to go.
Great. Cedar, can you have a beehive and not take the honey out? Like, do you always have to extract the honey?
You can just leave it there, and some people choose to do that. They'll just let their hive fill up and they'll leave it there for the bees. After all, that's what the bees do naturally. They're storing their honey for the time ahead when there might not be enough flowers. Lucky for us, they often store more than they need, and we can share some too.
Great. Are inspections of the super flow mandatory, or is it do you just need to inspect the brood box?
So it's mandatory to inspect the brood box for pests and disease, but not your honey supers. So the brood box is where you'll find issues like AFB or EFB, which are the ones that are really serious. So that's why it's mandatory to get in there and have a look for those, and make sure you're getting in there a few times a year and going through each comb properly and having a look for any sunken dark cappings with piercings in them, and that could be a sign that you've got AFB. It's free to send away a little test on a slide here in Australia to do a check if you're unsure, but hopefully, fingers crossed, that you get many happy years of beekeeping without having to deal with that.
Great. David's is prepping his hive, obviously, I think getting ready to take off his super for winter. Just wondering what your best tips are for getting the bees out of the super once he's taken it off.
Okay, so what I normally do, I've experimented with all sorts of different ways, but what I normally do is just take out each frame and shake the bees off first and brush the remaining off, and I usually set up a box a little ways away, so you pull one of the flow frames out and you shake the bees off, and then as you wander you brush the last ones off and put it in your box nearby, and you keep doing that till you've taken all of the frames out and all of the bees are off. However, there are other ways. In some countries you can use products that will actually repel the bees. Some people put some of that under the lid and they wait some time so the bees will go down and avoid that area. But generally it's probably just nice and quick to shake and brush them off.
Great. Here's a good one, Seed. Why do bees die without their queen?
So the turnover of bees is quite quick. The foraging bees might only last a month, and so that's normal, that's what bees do. So what happens if the queen stops laying, or you lose your queen, there's no new eggs being laid, then there'll be no new bees to replace all of those foragers that are going to die after a month or so. So that way, what happens is your colony starts to shrink, and eventually will die out, and there's no more bees to replace them. So it's important to keep a laying queen. Generally the bees do that themselves. If the queen dies for some reason, they'll raise another one, but they do need the eggs or young larvae to do that. So if they don't have the resources, or for whatever reason they don't get it together, then that's when you have a hive that's queenless, and you'll need to rectify that situation by giving them those eggs or young larvae, or or you could introduce a queen that you've purchased in the mail. Now, I was just seeing, if you have a look through this window here, there's a little capping flake here. The bees have already started to tear off those capping and start the rebuild. I don't know if you can see just in front of my finger, there's a piece of wax flipping around with some of the bees. Come on, do it again for the camera. You can see it just there. So I was just noticing they're quite quick to get in there and tear off the cappings and start that process of rebuild, and they've started even before we've closed off the frame. So when the bees are busy, they can tear off those cappings and rebuild it really quite quickly. And when they're not busy and there's not much nectar, sometimes they'll just leave it for a while and get to it when they when they can be bothered.
When they're not exhausted. Cedar, Jennifer's asking, is it all right to freeze the super over winter?
Yes, so you won't harm your flow frames by freezing them, and it can be a good way to keep them away from things like humidity. If there is humidity, perhaps it'd be unusual to have a humid winter if you've got a really cold area, so you might not need a freezer. You might just need to put them away from vermin and things if you live in a cold climate. But here, if we were taking a box off, keeping it in a freezer would be by far the best way to keep it in that frozen state, ready to go back on the hive at some later time. However, if you don't have a freezer, there's other things you can do. You can just keep them away from vermin, and if you're in a humid climate, then what you'd want to do is try and wash off all the honey before you store them, so that you don't end up with fermented honey all on your frames.
Great. Brand new beekeeper here asking, can a hive be healthy if positioned somewhere sheltered from rain and dry but not much light in the winter?
Yes, they can. It's not a bad idea if you have a situation where you can put your hives under a roof. In some countries they build whole houses for their beehives, and they'll have 40 or so beehives under a little honey house, and that will keep your woodenware nice and dry, and certainly be a lovely environment for the bees. Having said that, a lot of beehives are outside, and a bit of sun's nice to keep things dry. So on balance, would you put your hive under a roof or outside in the sunshine? I'll be tempted to try under a roof, depending on if that's an appropriate spot. Think about the flight path where your bees are coming in and out, and make sure that's not going to get in the way of anybody walking by and things like that.
Great. Noah from Maitland's asking, at what stage do you suggest using the roof plug, obviously referring to the Flow Hive 2, as a honeycomb frame?
So you could certainly get in there and use it as a honeycomb frame. So what they're asking is, at what stage could I collect some honey under the roof of the hive here? So if you get in here and have a look, we've got a plug here. You can take that plug out, and the bees will then get into this cavity here and start building some comb in the roof, which can be fun if you want to just see how they build their natural comb. But they won't do that until they've really filled up the super. So they're unlikely to get up here and build comb until they've filled up the box. But once they've filled that up, then you could take that plug out and let them go nuts under the roof, or you could contain them a little bit by using one of those glass baking dishes, and then you can watch, pull off the lid and watch them work and watch them build their natural honeycomb in that area.
Fantastic. Cedar, once you've drained the honey out and the flow frame's all empty of honey, do you need to clean out the bottom trough?
You don't, but it's important to make sure that little leak back point is clear. Having said that, sometimes you get into the situation where it's nice and clear as you harvest, it unblocks that point. But what happens is the bees will be bees and they'll block that up, and then some honey will build up, and if it's in a humid climate, it could go fermented. If it's in a cold climate, it could go candied, and it could get a bit manky down there in that trough area. If that's happened, then by all means get in there and clean it out. Put a cloth on your key. So if you've got your key like this, just simply wrap a nice clean damp cloth around that and put it in there. Give it a good wipe out before you start. If it's gotten really messy down there, then you could also swish some water up this hose. Don't connect a hose to it because the water will flood into the hive, but you could simply squirt some water up there and let it flow out again to clean that area. Generally, I find I don't have to. If you keep that point open and allow the last remaining drops to go back to the bees, it works quite nicely, and that area stays clean because there normally isn't a way for things to get in there, like ants shouldn't be able to get into that area, for example.
Fantastic. Cedar, does the honey ever crystallise in the flow frames?
The answer is yes, but rarely. There was a lot of questions when we first started, and one of them was, but what about candied honey? And we get very, very few customers who have that issue. And the reason why is the bees keep the hive warm, so it's unlikely to start that candying process. However, if you take some of these frames out, let them get cold, then they're more likely to start going to candy. And if you do see that, then if it's partial candy, what you'll find is that you'll harvest and some honey will flow out, but some big sugar crystals will be left in the cells. If it's solid candy, some countries get really solid candy in the frames, then that will mean that you won't be able to harvest it. The honey will be stuck in there. You'll need to leave that for the bees. They get in there over winter and eat out that candy, and hopefully they'll replace it with some nice liquid honey again for you to harvest come the next season.
Beautiful. We've got some very observant people. A couple of people are saying, what's the yellow area through the window? And also, is there a spider in there?
Okay. The yellow area is just
side.
the beeswax. So there's quite a lot of wax build up, and the bees will cover all of the cells in wax, and it's a fine film and it does build up over time. And in this case, it's a yellow coloured beeswax. So you're talking about the side window. Okay. So again, this is a bit of what's called burrcomb, and that there is a huntsman spider. They get quite big. They get to the size of our hand here in Australia. I've got lots of them in my house. They don't bother us. They can give you a nip, but they don't have poison. So that's a huntsman spider. My kids tend to make songs about them. And here is the burrcomb. So the burrcomb is what bees naturally do. If they find a vacant space, they'll start to build comb. We've tried to space it so that they're less likely to do that. However, the genetics of one hive might be more burrcomby than another hive, and in this particular case, these bees have decided to connect a bit of burrcomb from the frame to the window. At some stage, it looks like they've done that in the past and then chewed it away again as they've started to use those cells. It's not really an issue. It's quite normal for bees to have a bit of burrcomb around the place.
Just spotted the spider myself.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Trace being a Kiwi, they're not used to spiders.
Justin's just tuned in from Newcastle, and they've had a really, really wet winter, and only things are starting to dry out now. Just noticed a couple of his frames have got a little bit of mould on them in the hive. Just his question is, should he clean the frames, and if so, how? Or should he just leave it and will the bees kind of sort it out for him?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally, the bees are better at cleaning it than we are. So once your hive gets strong, they'll get in there and they'll fix that up. However, if you do decide you want to clean them, then the best thing you could do is get some nice hot water from your laundry tap and give them a good wash. If you put them in the open position, then the warm water can flow down through all of the cells just like the honey does and help give it a good clean. You'll then need to shake that water out, let it dry before giving it back to the hive. So if you've left the frames out and they've gotten all covered in wax moth and vermin and mouldy honey and fermented honey, then giving a good wash is a good idea before putting it back into the hive. You'll give your bees a bit of a head start. Having said that, bees are quite incredible at fixing up comb in a hive.
Fantastic. I just wanted to read this one out. It's from Larry in Washington, the USA. Started beekeeping last year with the Flow Hive 2. Now has 2 Flow Hives. Larry has Parkinson's and he's just saying how the Flow Hive has made harvesting honey possible for him. So we just wanted to shout out a big thank you.
Amazing, Larry.
Yeah. Cedar, how much space do you need around the hive or in your backyard to have a Flow Hive?
So the great thing about beekeeping is it's a very small footprint, and although your bees are really farming and collecting nectar from perhaps a up to 10-kilometre radius or 6 miles around here, you only need a small amount of space for your hive. So that means you can get a real amount of produce from a very small footprint. So for that reason, people keep bees on balconies in the city, they keep bees on rooftops, they keep bees in their urban backyards. So it's more about the flight path of the bees and checking in with your neighbours, making sure there's nobody with allergic reactions, anaphylaxis to bees, that having hives around could increase the likelihood of bee stings, and so there's some factors to consider there when you situate your hive, but generally you can keep a hive in a very small space. So my sister was keeping them on her balcony in Berlin, and there's some great photos of all the city beekeeping that goes on. It's become really quite popular, and rightly so. It's such an extraordinary thing to be doing. It enables us to get real produce from such a small amount of space, which is such a rewarding thing to be able to do.
Fantastic. Cedar, can you use a Langstroth inner cover and a roof on a Flow Hive super?
Yes, absolutely. So some people do that, but you don't necessarily need this roof. You can just put a standard flat roof on top with whatever kind of inner cover you want. I've got hives at my place like that as well. There's no issue doing that at all.
Do you think there's any issue, Cedar, with if you have got hives in the city due to pollution or dirt on flowers that they'd be eating? Do you think that will affect the honey or the bees?
It's a good question, and as far as my understanding goes, and if you've got information on that, it'd be interesting to hear your opinions on it. But bees tend to take the chemical load, if you like, out in their bodies when they process the nectar. So that's amazing, and it's it's a bit rough to think about the amount of chemicals humans put into the environment and how that affects the bees and so on. So you can get chemical residue building up in the wax in the hive, and that has been studied, and for that reason it's a nice idea to cycle out the frames in your brood box to make sure they've got happy, healthy cells down there to store their babies in. And to do that, come springtime, you move some of the frames you'd like to cycle out to the edges, wait till they're all honey, no brood anymore, and then take them out of the hive. Or if you're using naturally drawn comb, you can cut that wax out and they'll start again on that comb, building fresh new wax, and away they go.
Fantastic. Bit of a question on a beekeeper, has a mixture of hives, but just wondering, Cedar, what do you think about the top bar hives?
Top bar hives are cool. They're basically you're letting the bees draw the natural comb through a bunch of sticks in a more coffin-shaped kind of hive, and it's a popular thing to do too. And generally, to process that honey, either people just pull out some frames for honeycomb, or they crush and strain the honey from those frames. So by all means, get a few different types of hives. It's wonderful to experiment and see what works for you and your bees. And it's just fascinating, all types of beekeeping, to get in there and see what the bees do and watch them build.
Fantastic. People noticing, Cedar, that a lot of those flow frames in the hive that you're harvesting from are all looking nice and full. So would you empty most of it now, or would you leave some?
Look, we've actually jumped the gun a little bit here, and we just needed some honey in the office, so we've gone and harvested a frame. The reason why I've done that is I can see that the nectar is now coming in. This frame wasn't quite full, and we can see that at the start by the way they hadn't capped all of the frames at the end. If you look in the side window, the suspicions are verified by there's no capping on these frames. You can't see the wax sheet they've put over the top. So this frame is far from ready. They'll be putting a lot more honey in that, building the wax out further and putting their wax capping to make sure that honey will store for later. Now, generally you'd wait till the hive was showing some more signs of being ready to harvest than this one is. However, we're getting a little impatient, so I've just decided to harvest one frame. I'll probably wait for the hive to fill up a bit more before harvesting any more.
Great, this is a good one for you, Cedar, having two kids yourself. Logan's got a 5-year-old and 2-year-old and would love to have a flow hive. Just wondering, is it safe to do in the backyard with small children around who might go near it?
Okay, we do have safety information links on our website at the bottom of most pages, and it's an important thing to consider is some people do have severe allergic reactions to bee stings as they do to ant bites or peanuts and so on. So you might want to check in on that, and but those safety concerns aside, it's a wonderful thing to be doing with your family and with your children. A lot of families around the world are really enjoying, especially the way the harvesting of the flow hive is done, because you can sit here and enjoy this process, which really it wasn't like that before. You had to get in your bee suit and smoker and pull out the frames and do all of that, which is a nice experience as well. But it's a different experience to sit here and just watch the honey pour out into the jar and get to taste it with the children and see that real link between bees and produce right here in front of your eyes. It's really is magical. And looking at the windows at the bees and watching what they do and the changes of the seasons and having a look at what's flowering, it's a beautiful educational piece.
Great. Cedar, what are your thoughts on, is it better for the bees to make their own comb in the brood box or start them off with foundation?
It's a bit of a personal choice as a beekeeper. I used to use wax foundation and spend my nights wiring up frames and getting the jumper leads from a 12-volt battery to heat up the wires and sink that foundation onto those wires, and that's just the way it was done, so that's the way I did it. But as time progressed, I started to learn that other beekeepers were doing it a different way, where they were allowing the bees to just draw the comb themselves inside the standard Langstroth frames. And I quickly jumped at that idea because it's just so much easier. You don't have to go through that foundation process, and you're not introducing wax from other hives. You don't need to go and purchase that wax, etc. And the bees can size the cells for themselves. So many beekeepers believe there's a health benefit in just letting the bees do the natural thing and hang their comb off the wooden frames in the brood box. So that's what I prefer to do. However, some people prefer to do a bit of a mixture and put some foundation in to give them a guide to get started, to make sure they're going to build straight, because that's the drawback of foundationless or not using foundation, is the bees may decide to build crossways. And if you don't catch that early and rectify that situation and get them building at least a few straight frames to start, then you could have quite a mess to clean up. Having said that, I don't find that situation very often. Mostly I can even dump a swarm into a box full of just foundationless frames with the comb guide in top, and they'll generally hang it straight enough to be able to work those frames. If you really want nice straight frames, then foundation will give you straighter frames and less wonky comb, which will make it slightly easier to pull the frames in and out. Also that you don't need to get back in there and have a look as they build. But I find that more rewarding to get in there and watch them build. It is more fun for me than sitting there wiring and waxing frames. But in the end, it's a personal choice. You can also use plastic foundation in the frames. Many beekeepers use that in the brood box. I find the bees, it does slow them down a bit. They do take a while to build on plastic frames in the brood box. So a few ideas. Generally you can mix it up and have a mixture, or you can play around and see what works for you.
Cedar, what's the lifespan of a flow hive?
So we've designed it to last a very long time. Obviously it's early days, we're 5 years in now. If you do have any trouble with your flow frames, do get in contact. We want them to be a very long-lasting product. The woodenware is something that does need some attention. If you once you get to a couple of years in, you'll find there'll be quite a bit of natural organics building up, some mildew on the outside. You need to attack it with some sandpaper, give it a little recoat of oil again to keep it looking good. So it depends on your maintenance there. Sometimes you'll need to add some sealer on the roof, make sure there's not lots of water getting into your hive, because that will start, that'll feed those fungi and things and start degrading your woodenware. The cedar has natural properties of repelling mildew and wood rot and things like that. So it's a very popular choice, especially in North America, is that wood for that longevity of the hive. So again, if you have any issues with your hives, do get in contact, and it's what we want to be doing is making a very long-lasting product that can provide a great home for your bees and a beautiful, gentle way of harvesting for a long time.
Cedar, does the flow hive come with 1 or 2 brood boxes?
So it comes with 1 brood box. So the configuration you see in all of these hives here is a single brood box, single super. That's the way we like to run it here. I find just take a split when they build up is a good kind of policy. However, lots of beekeepers will be suggesting that you run bigger hives. Conventionally, there's 2 sort of things here. The mentality's been store your honey on your hive and harvest it in one big batch. We've sort of gone and changed that and gone, well, keep tapping it off and store your honey in jars on the shelf instead. So that means is that you don't have to have so many boxes, you don't need to maintain so many hive boxes. So that's the way I like to run it. However, in those colder regions, if you go into the extremely cold places where there's really only several months of good foraging weather in a year, then you might need more honey stores, more boxes to survive through that winter time. So it can be popular to put another brood box or some more supers on your hive in those colder regions. Also, if you don't want to take splits or do swarm management, then adding another brood box will mean your bees will be less likely to swarm as well. So a little bit up to you how you want to do it. You can certainly add more supers or more brood boxes to your hive.
But
Time for one more question.
Okay, one more question. Okay, lucky last. Don, this is your question. Once you've harvested, which is what you're doing now, and you've uncapped the frames, do you have to do anything else once you close them off, or do the bees just then work their magic?
That was a real win when we were inventing the flow frames. Now, we had all of these crazy contraptions. I even tried to get bees not to put wax capping on frames at one point by using all sorts of different surfaces. And then I had these contraptions inside that took the capping off while you harvested, then put it back on again at the end, and all these sort of things. But in the end, it was a real win that the bees actually noticed that the honey's drained out from beneath their feet. They get in there and you can actually see them right now chewing away and uncapping those cells, and the process is starting of the repair work to get those cells ready for storing honey, and they will do that quite quickly, so the bees just take care of it. In terms of the trough at the bottom, let's go through that process right now, and I'll show you what to do to complete the harvesting process. So first of all, you get your key, you put it in the top slot. Now there's 2 slots up there, and what you're trying to do is push those parts back downwards. So you insert the key, and you can just do it all in one movement, all the way until you feel that knock at the back. It's important to put it all the way in because you want to make sure you close all of those cells, and you turn it to a 90 like that. And I would recommend leaving that for 20 or 30 seconds. The reason why is those parts are now moving back into alignment. You want to make sure they get back into alignment. So while you're waiting for that, you can take your tube out. Now it's just a matter of pulling the tube out quickly and inserting this little cap into there, and you can get used to it and not spill any honey in the process. And what you'll find is pretty quickly, I might just turn that cap around so you can see, we've left a little bee space at the bottom there, and yeah, you can see it. You can see the bee's tongues actually licking the last remaining drops right there at the bottom, and that's why we've put that little gap at the bottom for the last remaining drops to go back to the bees. So we've tried to design that so it's self cleaning without you having to think about it. Now, you can either just eat the last remaining honey in that tube, or you can leave it on the edge of your jar like that, and the last bit will drip in. Don't forget to put the cap back in the top here. So there's a little tab. If you've forgotten to reset them, that tab there is to remind you that you haven't put the reset that frame for the bees to use it. So if you can't get the cap in, then you may have forgotten to turn the key in the top slot. We did that because in the beginning we found that we were actually forgetting to do that, so that served very nicely as a reminder. I'm just having a look at the cells now, and you can actually see multiple bees down the cells already, so they've any capping, and they're hard at work licking up the last remaining drops, repairing the cells, and the whole process will just start again. And we'll probably find that the flows in. You can see a bee here with a piece of capping just in its jaws at the front, wandering around, and you'll probably find that the bees will fill up this frame within the next week, and we can harvest it again. Thank you very much for watching and all your fantastic questions. If you've got answers to other people's questions in the thread, by all means jump in and help answer. And if you've got ideas on what you'd like us to cover next time, put them in the comments below, and hopefully we can then go on and answer all your questions so that you can get started in this fascinating and extremely rewarding pursuit of beekeeping.